The scream cuts through the engine hum like a blade. At 35,000 feet above the Nevada desert, somewhere between Las Vegas and Chicago, Flight 1010 has just become the most dangerous place on Earth. Not because of mechanical failure, not because of weather, not because of anything the Boeing 737's crew of 6 was trained to handle. It is dangerous because of one woman. One woman who has just done something so incomprehensible, so criminally reckless, that 3 flight attendants freeze in the galley for a full 2 seconds before any of them can form a coherent thought. The scream belongs to a 9-year-old girl named Maya Reeves. It is not a tantrum scream. It is not a scared of turbulence scream. It is the kind of scream that comes from a child who is alone, disoriented, and beginning to realize that her blood sugar is dropping fast. Maya is legally blind. She is diabetic. She is currently locked inside Lavatory 2 or at the rear of the aircraft with no way to reach her medical bag, which sits helplessly in the overhead bin above seat 34C, 40 feet and an entire cabin away. Outside that thin aluminum door, 279 passengers are going about their business, ordering drinks, watching movies, complaining about legroom. They have no idea. Most of them won't know anything is wrong until the screaming gets louder. Until a flight attendant named Priya Anand starts sprinting down the aisle. Until a pilot's voice comes over the intercom with a tone that makes people put down their pretzels and pay very close attention. The woman responsible for locking that door is sitting in seat 32A. She is sipping a complimentary glass of Chardonnay. She is smiling. Her name is Sandra Holbrook, and this is the single worst decision she will make in her entire 43 years of life. But here is what Sandra Holbrook does not know. What nobody in this cabin knows yet, except for one calm, quiet man sitting in seat 34C with the United States Federal Aviation Administration identification badge tucked inside his carry-on. What that man is about to reveal will turn this flight into the most talked about airline incident of the decade. And Sandra Holbrook will not be going home tonight. She will not be going home for a very long time. Keep watching, because what happens in the next 40 minutes at 35,000 feet is something that nobody on this plane will ever forget. To understand how Flight 1010 became a federal crime scene in the sky, you have to go back 24 hours. You have to go back to a woman who has spent the better part of 2 decades treating airline travel like her personal kingdom and everyone around her like unwilling subjects. Sandra Holbrook grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona, the youngest daughter of a moderately successful real estate developer. She had never been told no. Not really. Not in any way that stuck. By the time she was in her 20s, she had developed a philosophy about the world that can be summarized simply: the rules applied to other people. The lines were for other people. The fees were for other people. The discomfort was always someone else's fault. She had been married twice. Both husbands cited, in separate divorce proceedings, variations of the same behavior pattern. Explosive anger when expectations were not met, a pathological need to dominate social situations, and a habit of weaponizing customer service complaint systems with the skill of a seasoned attorney. Sandra knew the names of every airline's corporate complaint email address. She had a folder on her laptop. She had named it, without any apparent irony, Justice, that contained 847 individual complaint letters filed over 11 years. She had received 4 partial refunds, 17 upgrade vouchers, and 2 formal written apologies from airline CEOs. She kept those letters framed in her home office. Sandra Holbrook had been banned from 2 regional carriers. Not officially. They had no formal mechanism for that. But her name sat on internal notes that circulated quietly through customer service departments. Frontline staff who saw her check in sometimes traded glances. Sometimes they drew straws. On the morning of Tuesday, the 14th, Sandra arrived at Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas at 9:47 a.m. for a 10:55 boarding on Skybridge Airlines Flight 1010, nonstop service to Chicago O'Hare. She was booked in seat 32A, an aisle seat in Economy Plus. This is important. Economy Plus. Not business class. Not first class. Economy Plus. But Sandra had arrived at the gate wearing the energy of someone who expected an entirely different category of treatment. She was dressed in a cream linen blazer and dark sunglasses that she never fully removed, even indoors. She carried 2 large roller bags despite the airline's clear one-bag carry-on policy. When the gate agent, a young man named Darnell who had been on shift since 5 a.m., politely informed her that the second bag would need to be checked, Sandra set her jaw in a way that Darnell would later describe in his incident report as like watching a storm system organize. "I am a Platinum Plus member," Sandra said, loud enough that the family of 4 waiting behind her could hear every word. "I have been flying Skybridge for 11 years. I have 68,000 miles banked, and I will be using them to call your corporate office the second this plane lands if you touch my bag." Darnell checked her account. She was technically a Platinum Plus member. The Platinum Plus carry-on policy did permit 1 personal item and 1 carry-on. 2 roller bags still did not qualify. But Darnell had been trained to de-escalate, not to win arguments, and so he waved the bag through, silently flagged the interaction in the system, and watched Sandra roll toward the jetway with the posture of someone who had just won a significant battle. She had not won anything. She had simply stored up more rope. 2 gates down, in the same terminal, a man named David Reeves was managing something that required an entirely different kind of patience. He was 41 years old, compact in build, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and the particular stillness of someone who has spent a great deal of time in rooms where composure is not optional. He was dressed plainly. Dark trousers, a gray polo shirt, no visible insignia of any kind. He was crouched next to a 9-year-old girl with neat braids and oversized noise-canceling headphones. Maya Reeves had been blind since birth. A rare congenital condition had left her with only the ability to distinguish light from dark in her left eye, nothing in her right. She moved through the world with a combination of a collapsible white cane, a photographic memory for spatial layouts once she had walked them once, and a cellular confidence that most sighted adults never achieve. She was also a type 1 diabetic, diagnosed at age 5, currently managing with a continuous glucose monitor worn on her left arm and a medical bag, a bright red soft case, that contained her insulin pen, glucose tablets, a juice box, and her emergency contact protocol. Her father was explaining the plane to her, not because she was afraid, because she liked to know exactly where everything was. "Okay, Braidhead," David said, using the nickname she'd chosen herself when she was 6. "Tell me what I told you." "Seat 34C, Maya said, not looking up from where her fingers were absently working a fidget ring. "Windows on the left so the sun will be warm. Lavatory at the back is 16 steps from our row. Lavatory at the front is 32 steps. Galley cart fits in the aisle so we wait for it to pass. My bag goes overhead bin directly above us and we do not check it. Ever. And if you start to feel, I tell you or I tell the flight attendant whose name I will learn during boarding, and I do not go anywhere without saying so first." David Reeves squeezed her shoulder. Maya pulled one headphone cup back and tilted her head at him with a small, skeptical smile. "You're going to make me do the whole protocol out loud again, aren't you? You know it." What David Reeves had not told his daughter, and what he would not tell her until she was older, was that this trip to Chicago was for a review hearing. David was one of 17 senior inspectors within the FAA's Flight Standards District Office, a Federal Aviation Authority investigator with the legal power to ground aircraft, revoke pilot certificates, and initiate federal prosecution against airlines for safety violations. He had been working a case involving irregular maintenance logs at a regional carrier for 8 months. He was going to Chicago to present findings that could result in the suspension of operating certificates for 3 regional routes. He was not traveling in an official capacity today. He was traveling as a father taking his daughter to see her grandmother. His credentials were packed in his carry-on. His badge was real. His patience, as anyone who had ever tried to cut corners in front of David Reeves could attest, was not infinite. They boarded during the family pre-boarding call, which Sandra Holbrook, who had positioned herself at the very front of the Group 1 line despite her Group 2 boarding pass, watched with visible irritation. Maya moved down the jetway with her cane in her right hand and her left hand touching the wall lightly. David walked directly behind her. The lead flight attendant, Priya Anand, 16 years with Skybridge, and the kind of calm that comes from having managed a full medical emergency at altitude twice, was the first one to greet them at the aircraft door. "Good morning, sweetheart," Priya said. crouching slightly so she was closer to Maya's eye level out of instinct. "What's your name?" "Maya. We're in 34C and D. And I'm diabetic, so if I seem weird it might not be attitude." Priya laughed. "A real one." She made eye contact with David over Maya's head, and he gave her the short version in 30 seconds. "Medical bag, red case, stays in overhead bin above 34. Do not check under any circumstances, CGM on left arm, juice box protocol if she looks pale." Priya nodded with the precision of someone filing information into the correct mental drawer, then walked them to their seats personally. They settled in. David stowed the red medical bag directly overhead. Maya found the window with her palm, felt the vibration of the engines below, and smiled in a way that made the elderly woman in the window seat of 34 reach over and pat her hand without saying anything. Everything was fine. Everything was perfectly fine. Until Sandra Holbrook appeared at row 32. She dropped into 32A, immediately reclined her seat to its full extent, before the door had even closed, and began rearranging the seat back pocket with the aggressive energy of someone redecorating. Then she turned around. She turned around and looked directly at Maya. "Whose kid is this?" Sandra said. "Not asked," said. David looked up from his phone. "My daughter," he said pleasantly. "She's going to be a problem," Sandra said, with the certainty of a person who has never been wrong in her own estimation. "I can already tell. Kids on planes are a problem. Especially," she gestured vaguely at Maya's cane and headphones, "especially kids with issues." David Reeves said with extraordinary composure, "She's 9 years old. She'll be fine." "I have noise sensitivity," Sandra said. "I've already flagged it with the airline. If she makes noise, I'm going to need to be moved." "Then I hope she doesn't make noise," David said, and looked back at his phone. Maya, who could hear everything, leaned her head toward her father and whispered, "She's going to be a problem." "I know," David said quietly. "Don't worry about it." This was the last moment of ordinary calm on Flight 1010. The cabin door sealed at 11:07 a.m. The jetway retracted. The ground crew signaled clear. Up front, Captain Renata Olivos and First Officer James Kwan began the pre-departure flow checks with the methodical efficiency of a crew that had worked together for 4 years on this exact route. The Boeing 737-800 pushed back from Gate C-14 at 11:14. Weather between Las Vegas and Chicago was clear. A tailwind would put them into O'Hare 20 minutes early. It looked, from every measurable angle, like a completely unremarkable Tuesday flight. Sandra Holbrook had other plans. She started before they left the ground. As the plane taxied toward runway 26L, she pressed the call button. Flight attendant Marcus Webb, who was seated in the jump seat at the aft galley per taxi and takeoff protocol, could not respond. He made eye contact with her down the aisle and gave the universal signal. Finger raised. "Please wait." Sandra pressed the button again, and again, 3 times. Marcus's jaw tightened. He did not move. FAA regulations are explicit. Flight attendants must remain seated and belted from the time the aircraft begins moving until the seatbelt sign is switched off after takeoff. This is not optional. This is not a customer preference. This is federal code. Sandra, apparently unaware of or completely unbothered by this, pressed the button a 4th time. 2 rows back, David Reeves noted this quietly. He noted it the way a building inspector notes a hairline crack, without alarm but without dismissing it either. They lifted off at 11:22. The aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign chimed off, and Marcus Webb was out of his jump seat and at Sandra's row within 45 seconds. He was 28 years old, 3 years with Skybridge, and had the kind of reflexively professional smile that masks a very sophisticated internal threat assessment system. "What can I help you with, ma'am?" "This seat," Sandra said, pointing at the empty middle seat beside her, 32B, "is too close to me. I paid for extra legroom and this is not extra legroom. Economy Plus does include 3 additional inches of—" "I know what it's supposed to include. I'm telling you what it actually includes, which is not enough. I want to be moved to business class." "I'm sorry, ma'am. Business class is fully booked on this flight." Then I want a different row. Marcus scanned the cabin. There were, in fact, several empty middle seats, but no empty rows with aisle seats in Economy Plus. He explained this. Sandra told him he wasn't trying hard enough. He smiled and said he would see what he could do. This is airline language for, I am going to walk away from this conversation and pray that you forget you had it. Sandra did not forget. Sandra never forgot. For the next 40 minutes, she was a low-grade hum of complaint. The air was too cold, then too warm. The beverage selection was inadequate. The overhead announcement about connecting gates was too loud. Every 6 minutes, like a biological function, she pressed the call button for something new. Marcus and Priya began a silent triage system between them, alternating who responded to 32A, because neither of them could handle 2 consecutive interactions without their professional composure beginning to fray at edges visible only to each other. Through it all, Maya Reeves sat 2 rows back and kept herself busy. She had a Bluetooth audiobook playing through her headphones, a fantasy novel about a girl who could navigate by sound alone, which she had listened to 4 times already. She had her fidget ring. She had a small bag of pretzels that her father had packed. She was, by any measure, the easiest passenger on the plane. She was not the problem. She had never been the problem. At 12:18 p.m., approximately 54 minutes into the flight, Maya turned to her father and said, "Dad, I need the lavatory." David was deep in a case document on his phone. He looked up. He checked her face. No pallor, no sweat. CGM on her wrist showing a stable 108. All fine. Normal 9-year-old request. "Back lavatory," he said. 16 steps, you know the drill. I'll count you out. Maya unclipped her seatbelt, picked up her cane, and stood. David watched her move into the aisle. She tapped her way toward the rear of the aircraft with the unhurried confidence of someone who has done this 100 times. The passengers around her moved feet and bags without being asked. The aisle was clear. Everything was normal. Sandra Holbrook watched her pass. There is a particular quality to the stillness that comes over a person who has just had a bad idea. A kind of focused blankness. A narrowing. David Reeves did not see it. He had already looked back at his document. Nobody saw what happened next. That was, in the way of all great cruelties, the point. The back lavatory on a Boeing 737 has an accordion-fold door that latches from inside with a simple twist mechanism. From the outside, in normal circumstances, the door can be opened for emergencies by pressing a tab concealed under the lavatory sign. A safety feature known to flight attendants and, as it turned out, to at least one passenger who had spent 11 years filing complaints about every aspect of airline operation and had therefore, in her obsessive research, learned things she should not have. Sandra Holbrook waited until Marcus Webb had moved to the forward galley. She stood up. She walked to the rear lavatory, and she turned the external emergency latch mechanism, not to open the door, but to engage the secondary lock, a maintenance position that could only be released from outside using a specific sequence or a flight attendant tool. Then she walked back to her seat. From inside the lavatory, Maya heard the soft click. She did not immediately register what it meant. She finished what she needed to do, washed her hands with the deliberate care her father had drilled into her, and then reached for the door. The handle turned. The door did not move. She tried again. Still nothing. She tried a third time, harder. The door held. Maya Reeves stood in a Boeing 737 rear lavatory at 35,000 feet. In the dark, the overhead light in Lavatory 2 had been flickering since Las Vegas, maintenance flagged but not yet serviced. Unable to see, unable to get out, and beginning to feel the first unmistakable edges of a blood sugar drop. Not yet dangerous, but moving in that direction. She did what she had been taught to do. She knocked. Loudly. She called out. She said, clearly and loudly, "Hello? I need help. I'm locked in." And then she screamed. The scream was what broke it open. Priya Anand heard it from the forward galley where she was restocking the beverage cart. It was not the scream of a child being dramatic. Priya had 4 children of her own. She knew that sound immediately, viscerally, in a way that bypassed rational analysis and went straight to her feet, which were already moving before her brain had issued the order. She sprinted down the aisle. 279 passengers turned heads. Someone dropped a bag of chips. The elderly woman in 34A half rose from her seat. David Reeves looked up from his document, looked at the empty seat beside him, and was on his feet in the same second. Maya! He was already moving. Back lavatory, Priya said as he fell in behind her. She had put the information together that fast, running and processing simultaneously. Something's wrong with the latch. At the lavatory door, Priya knocked sharply. Maya? Honey, this is Priya, your flight attendant. I hear you. I'm right here. Are you okay? Maya's voice came back thready but controlled. I can't get the door, and I think I need juice. Those 4 words, I think I need juice, hit David Reeves with the force of cold water. That was the code. That was the phrase Maya used when her glucose was dropping. He spun to face the aisle. I need her medical bag from the overhead bin above row 34. Right now, red case. The elderly woman in 34A was already on her feet, pulling it down. She was faster than she looked. She handed it over the heads of 3 seated passengers in a kind of improvised relay. David had it in 15 seconds. Priya had already retrieved the flight attendant lavatory tool from the rear galley service kit, a small L-shaped implement used exactly for emergency door releases. But as she inserted it into the housing, she stopped. She inserted it again. She looked at it. This has been manually engaged, she said. Her voice was very flat. This is the maintenance lock. This doesn't happen by accident. She and David made eye contact. His was not the face of a frightened father anymore. It was something colder and more deliberate. He said quietly, "Who was back here?" Priya was already working the tool. 15 seconds. 20. The lock was stiff. It hadn't been operated in months. Maintenance locks rarely were. But it released. The door folded open. Maya came out fast, one hand finding her father's arm immediately. She was pale. The CGM beeper on her wrist was now singing a low warning tone. David already had the juice box open and in her hands before she had fully cleared the doorway. She drank without being told. David's hands were steady. The rest of him was not. I'm okay, Maya said between sips. Dad, I'm okay. I just got scared. I know, Braidhead, he said. I've got you. The cabin around them had gone very quiet. This is the particular silence of a confined space where 200+ people have just collectively realized that something serious has happened. Not turbulence. Not a medical moment. Something intentional. The word was passing down the rows in whispers. Something about the back bathroom. Something about the little girl with the cane. Something about a lock. Marcus Webb appeared from the forward galley, took in the scene in one practice sweep, and walked directly to Priya. She spoke to him for 11 seconds. Marcus's face did something controlled and then became very still. He reached for the interphone handset on the aft bulkhead and called the cockpit. Up front, Captain Renata Olivos had been monitoring the PA system passively, a pilot's background awareness always running. She picked up on the first ring. Priya, report. Priya took the handset. Captain, we have a deliberate passenger interference with the rear lavatory locking mechanism. A minor was trapped inside. The passenger is a type 1 diabetic. Blind. She is stable, currently being treated. The locking sequence required knowledge of the maintenance latch, which is not passenger accessible without intentional manipulation. There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds. Do you have a suspect? We believe so. Another pause. Then, Captain Olivos, contact me before any confrontation, and wake up Oscar. Oscar. The name meant nothing to the passengers nearby who might have heard it. But every Skybridge crew member on Flight 1010 knew exactly what it meant. Oscar was the internal designation for the Federal Air Marshal on board. Every Skybridge flight over 300 miles carried one. The Air Marshal on Flight 1010 was a man named Agent Torres. He was sitting in seat 14D in the middle of the cabin, wearing a blue flannel shirt, reading what appeared to be a paperback thriller. He had not moved in 2 hours. He had been watching everything. His phone buzzed with a crew system alert. He closed the paperback. He did not stand up yet, but something changed in his eyes. Meanwhile, in seat 32A, Sandra Holbrook was on her third glass of Chardonnay and had noticed, with a private satisfaction that she would later deny to every authority who asked her, that the girl with the cane had not passed her row again. She had not, in her years of calculated airline disruption, expected the lock mechanism to hold long. She had simply wanted peace and quiet. She had simply wanted the discomfort to stop. She had, in her own twisted assessment of the situation, solved a problem. This was the biggest mistake Sandra Holbrook had ever made. Bigger than both divorces. Bigger than 847 complaint letters. Bigger than anything that had come before. Because David Reeves, now standing at the rear of that aircraft with his daughter's hand in his, and the juice box empty, and the CGM reading a recovering 92 and climbing. David Reeves had just become someone very different from the quiet, plainly dressed man who had boarded this aircraft. He was now a federal aviation investigator who had just watched his blind, diabetic child be deliberately locked in an aircraft lavatory at altitude, and he was reaching into his carry-on bag. He walked up the aisle alone. Maya was in Priya's care at the rear galley, sitting on the folding jump seat with a second juice box and a blanket, stable and talking, and, because she was Maya, asking Priya whether she had ever had to use the defibrillator and whether it sounded like in the movies. Priya answered her with genuine warmth while tracking David's movement up the aisle in her peripheral vision. David moved without hurry. He stopped at row 32. He looked at Sandra Holbrook. She looked back at him with the expression of a person who has already decided how this conversation will end and has found that outcome satisfactory. "Your daughter is loud," Sandra said. "I thought you said she'd be fine." "She is fine," David said. "Now." Sandra took a sip of her wine. "Good. Then we're done here." "We're not done," David said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer." He was using a particular register of voice, not raised, not aggressive, controlled in a way that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with professional precision. "Did you engage the maintenance lock on the rear lavatory on this aircraft?" Something flickered across Sandra's face. "Gone in an instant, but there." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Okay," David said. He reached into the carry-on at his feet. He removed a leather credential holder. He opened it and held it so that Sandra and the passengers in 31, 32, and 33 could all see it clearly. The Federal Aviation Administration seal is gold on dark blue. The words Special Agent, Flight Standards Division are printed beneath it. The badge number is embossed. The photograph matches the man standing in the aisle. Sandra Holbrook's glass paused halfway to her mouth. "My name is David Reeves," he said, still in that precise, controlled voice. "I am a senior investigator with the FAA Flight Standards District Office. The little girl you have just locked in an aircraft lavatory is my daughter. She is legally blind. She is a type 1 diabetic. What you have done constitutes deliberate interference with aircraft cabin safety equipment under 49 U.S.C. Section 46503, which carries a federal criminal penalty of up to 20 years in prison." He paused. "Is there anything else you'd like to say to me?" The cabin had gone completely silent. Not the polite silence of people pretending not to listen. The total, absolute silence of 279 people who have stopped breathing. Sandra Holbrook made one more mistake. She said, "You can't prove I did anything." Behind her, in 31B, a man with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from his laptop. He had been sitting there since Las Vegas. He had a recording application open on his screen. He had pressed record when Sandra stood up and walked toward the rear of the plane, because something about her body language had struck him as deliberate and strange. He was a retired civil litigation attorney from Phoenix, and in 30 years of practice he had developed a very finely tuned instinct for intentional malice. "I can," the man said quietly. Agent Torres reached row 32 45 seconds later. He had not rushed. He had covered the distance in the efficient, unhurried way of someone who has secured aircraft situations in far more volatile conditions. His badge was in his hand. He did not raise his voice. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to place your tray table in the upright and locked position. Hand me any beverages and keep both hands visible on the armrests. We're going to talk very calmly and you are going to cooperate fully. Nod if you understand." Sandra opened her mouth. Nod. Agent Torres said, "If you understand." She nodded. Up front, Captain Olivos's voice came over the intercom with the particular controlled authority of a 15-year commercial captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are going to make an unscheduled stop in Denver. We anticipate adding approximately 45 minutes to our flight time. We appreciate your patience and will provide updates as available." She did not explain further. She did not need to. The cabin erupted, not in panic, but in that rare, electric murmur of a crowd that has understood exactly what it has just witnessed and is processing collective shock. The woman in 31B was crying. The retired attorney was still recording. 3 passengers in the rows behind Sandra had independently taken out their phones and were documenting the scene. The elderly woman from 34A had made her way up the aisle, which she should not have done with the seatbelt sign now on. But nobody stopped her, and she arrived at the rear galley and took Maya's free hand and simply held it. "Maya, still sitting in the jump seat," said to Priya. "Is my dad okay?" "Your dad," Priya said, "is extremely okay." Sandra Holbrook sat in seat 32A with Agent Torres on one side and a second flight attendant on the other. Her wine glass surrendered, her sunglasses removed, her face carrying the expression of someone who has finally, for the first time in 43 years, encountered a consequence she cannot file a complaint about. She tried one more approach. She tried, in a voice she intended to sound composed and reasonable, to explain that she had a noise sensitivity and a legal accommodation, and that she had felt threatened by the presence of a disruptive minor, and that her actions were a response to a stressful situation, and that she intended to contact her attorney. Agent Torres said, "That's your right, ma'am. You can contact your attorney when we land in Denver." "I want to be moved to a different seat," Sandra said. "That's not going to happen," Torres said. "I want to speak to the captain." "The captain is flying the aircraft," Torres said. "That's her job." "I am a Platinum Plus member," Sandra said. Torres looked at her. It was not a long look. It was the kind of look that ends conversations. "Ma'am," he said, "that is not going to be relevant to your situation going forward. Denver International Airport sits at an elevation of 5,434 feet above sea level, higher than any other major commercial airport in the United States. Flight 1010 descended through clear Colorado air and touched down at runway 17 at 2:11 p.m. Captain Olivos had already been in contact with Denver PD Aviation Unit and TSA. The aircraft was directed to a remote gate rather than a terminal gate, a detail that several passengers would later describe in their social media accounts as the moment the reality of the situation fully landed for them. As the door opened and the jetway extended, 2 Denver PD officers in uniform and 1 plainclothes TSA agent boarded the aircraft. They came with paperwork that Agent Torres had already generated from his onboard federal communication device. They came with handcuffs, which they used. They walked Sandra Holbrook off Flight 1010 through an aircraft full of people who watched her go in complete silence. She passed row 34. She did not look at Maya. Maya could not have seen her regardless. But Maya heard it. Heard the footsteps and the specific shuffle rhythm of someone being escorted. Heard the quality of the silence around it. She reached up and pulled one headphone cup back. "Is she gone?" she asked. Her father returned to his seat, squeezed her hand. "She's gone." "Good," Maya said, and put the headphone cup back. The cabin as one exhaled. What happened to Sandra Holbrook in the weeks and months that followed would come to be referenced in aviation safety circles, in legal journals, and in the online communities that track airline accountability with the devotion of dedicated archivists. She was charged under 49 U.S.C. 46503, interference with flight crew members and attendants, as well as a Colorado state charge of reckless endangerment of a child. The federal charge alone carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years. Her attorney, the real one, not the threatened one, negotiated it down through a plea agreement, but not by much. She received a sentence of 4 years with a mandatory aviation safety education component, full restitution to Skybridge Airlines for the diversion costs, which ran to approximately $68,000 including fuel, gate fees, crew overtime, and passenger compensation, and a lifetime federal no-fly order applicable to all commercial carriers operating under FAA jurisdiction. Not a skybridge ban. Not a regional ban. Every commercial aircraft. Forever. The 847-letter complaint folder became evidence. 11 years of documented, escalating boundary violations provided context that the federal prosecutor used in her sentencing memo, arguing successfully that Sandra's behavior on Flight 1010 was not an isolated incident but the logical endpoint of a sustained pattern. The retired attorney from 31B provided his recording. It was 11 minutes and 42 seconds of footage that captured Sandra's deliberate walk to the lavatory, the click of the maintenance latch, and her return to her seat with an expression he would later describe in his deposition as satisfied. The footage was clear. The audio was clear. The case against her was, as federal aviation cases rarely are, genuinely airtight. Skybridge Airlines issued a public statement 3 days after the incident, committing to additional rear lavatory latch security measures that would prevent external manipulation without a dual crew key system. They also announced the establishment of the Maya Protocol. Not a formal regulatory name that came later, but the internal crew designation for a set of enhanced procedures regarding traveling passengers with medical accommodations, specifically requiring a named crew contact, enhanced communication check-ins, and a no unaccompanied access buffer zone around any passenger who had been flagged with a medical or disability accommodation. David Reeves did not request recognition. He did not give media interviews. He wrote a 17-page internal FAA report about what the incident revealed regarding the accessibility of lavatory maintenance mechanisms to civilian passengers, and that report became the foundation of an updated FAA advisory circular distributed to all domestic carriers the following spring. Priya Anand received a commendation from Skybridge and a letter from the FAA. Marcus Webb received the same. The elderly woman from 34A, whose name turned out to be Dr. Eleanor Park, 76 years old, retired pediatric surgeon, wrote a letter to Maya directly, which Maya asked her father to read to her twice. She wrote back. They have corresponded ever since. Maya Reeves, for her part, arrived in Chicago 3 hours late. Her grandmother was waiting at the arrivals gate with a sign that said Braidhead in large letters, which Maya found before anyone pointed her toward it, because she could hear her grandmother's particular laugh from 40 feet away. She was fine. She had been fine, really, from the moment the door opened. She was the kind of child who processes fear quickly and files it away cleanly, because she has been navigating a world that was not built for her since the day she arrived in it and has learned that fear is a data point, not a verdict. She did tell her grandmother about Sandra. She told it the way a 9-year-old tells a story, with drama and sound effects and a very accurate imitation of the particular silence that fell over the cabin when her father opened his credentials. Her grandmother listened with the expression of someone who has been proud of a family for a very long time and has just found one more reason. And the lady, her grandmother said. What happened to the lady? Handcuffs, Maya said, with the simple satisfaction of someone reporting a fact. And then she was gone. This is what 35,000 feet over the Nevada desert can teach you, if you let it. That a plane is a closed system, that actions have no escape route, that the confined and pressurized aluminum tube of a commercial aircraft is, in the end, the great equalizer. Nobody runs, nobody hides, nobody files a complaint letter and waits for a voucher to make it disappear. The evidence goes up when you go up, and it stays up there with you until you land. Sandra Holbrook thought she was dealing with a child and her distracted father. She thought she was, as she had always thought in every airport and every gate and every boarding line, the most important person in the room. She was sitting 2 rows in front of the one person on that aircraft with the federal authority to reshape aviation policy. She locked his blind, diabetic daughter in a broken lavatory at altitude. She did it because she thought nobody was watching. She did it because she thought she could. She was wrong about all of it. If you've made it this far, this story is for everyone who has ever felt powerless on a plane, outnumbered in a boarding line, or silenced in a space you have every right to be in. Share this video, not because justice made the news, justice rarely does, but because sometimes it lands exactly where it needs to. And if you think that was something, wait until you hear what happened on Flight 2247, where a corporate attorney tried to steal a first-class seat from a woman he did not know was the airline's chief safety officer. That one involves the pilot herself walking out of the cockpit. That video goes up next week. Stay on the ground, or stay in the air. Either way, be decent.